The Pacific Ocean is black and flat. No moon. No wind. Only the slow breathing of the water. It is late 1943. Somewhere west of the Solomon Islands, a Japanese submarine surfaces briefly, its hull breaking the skin of the sea. The crew believes they are invisible. This is how submarines survive, by trusting the dark, by trusting distance, by trusting that the enemy can only see with human eyes. On the bridge, an officer scans the horizon. Nothing moves. No lights. No aircraft. The sea feels empty. Several miles away, an American destroyer cuts through the darkness at speed. Steel hull. Narrow beam. Radar antenna turning steadily above the mast. Inside the Combat Information Center, a green glow pulses across a circular screen. A small echo appears. Then steadies. Then moves. No one raises their voice. No alarm sounds. The contact is already plotted. Speed calculated. Course adjusted. The destroyer does not search the sea. It already knows where to go. On the submarine, the crew has no warning. No sound. No signal. No sign that the ocean itself has changed. The first shells arrive without explanation. And in that moment, Japanese commanders would begin to understand that the night no longer belonged to submarines alone. Before radar changed the sea, submarines lived by one rule: remain unseen. In the decades leading up to the Second World War, every major navy understood that submarines were fragile machines. They were slow underwater, blind beyond a few hundred yards, vulnerable if caught on the surface. Their strength came not from armor or speed, but from uncertainty. If an enemy could not see them, could not hear them, could not predict them, then submarines could strike and vanish. No navy embraced this logic more confidently than Imperial Japan. Japanese naval doctrine before 1941 was shaped by expectation of a single, decisive surface battle. Submarines were not intended to wage commerce warfare like German U-boats. Instead, they were tools of attrition, meant to thin enemy fleets before the final clash. Japanese submarines were large, long-ranged, and heavily armed. Some carried aircraft. Others carried the powerful Type 95 oxygen-fueled torpedo, capable of high speed without leaving a visible wake. To Japanese commanders, the ocean at night was a natural ally. Darkness protected surfaced submarines while they recharged batteries, moved at higher speed, and maneuvered into firing position. The assumption was simple and deeply ingrained. If the enemy could not see, they could not react in time. Early war experience seemed to confirm this belief. In 1941 and early 1942, Allied anti-submarine warfare in the Pacific was weak. American destroyers were few. Crews were inexperienced. Coordination between ships, aircraft, and shore commands was uneven. Detection relied primarily on sonar, useful only at close range and often unreliable in tropical waters. Visual sightings remained critical, especially at night. Japanese submarines operated aggressively around Hawaii, the west coast of the United States, and the approaches to Australia. They attacked warships and transports alike. They believed, with some justification, that American naval forces were technically behind, too dependent on daylight, too cautious in darkness. The submarine's greatest defense was still silence. What Japanese commanders did not yet appreciate was how rapidly the United States was changing the very meaning of detection. Not through a single invention, but through a system. A new way of seeing the sea. While Japan focused on refining torpedoes and hull design, American and British scientists were engaged in a quieter race, one that did not involve speed or armor, but electromagnetic waves. Radar had existed before the war, but in 1939 it was crude. Large antennas. Limited resolution. Inconsistent reliability at sea. Many naval officers saw it as an experimental aid, not a decisive weapon. But the pressures of global war forced rapid refinement. By 1941, British experience against German U-boats had already shown radar's potential. Surface search sets could detect ships beyond visual range. Airborne radar could find submarines at night or through cloud. These lessons crossed the Atlantic even before the United States entered the war. After Pearl Harbor, development accelerated at unprecedented speed. American industry, universities, and the Navy itself were mobilized into a single research effort. Laboratories worked around the clock. Prototypes moved directly from test benches to ships. Flaws were corrected at sea, not in theory. What mattered was not perfection, but deployment. And by 1942, American destroyers were beginning to carry something Japanese submarines had never truly faced before. The ability to detect a surfaced enemy in complete darkness, at miles of distance, without revealing their own position. At first, Japanese encounters with this new threat were confusing rather than alarming. A submarine might be illuminated by gunfire without ever having seen a ship. Depth charges might fall with uncanny accuracy. Crews reported being attacked without warning, but explanations remained vague. Commanders attributed losses to bad luck, or improved Allied training, or simple coincidence. They did not yet understand that the ocean itself was being mapped invisibly, swept by rotating beams no human eye could perceive. And that misunderstanding would prove costly. Because radar was not arriving alone. It was being integrated, quietly and methodically, into an entire system of American naval warfare that was about to close the night forever. Radar did not change naval warfare overnight. It reshaped it step by step, through integration, repetition, and doctrine. In 1942, the United States Navy began deploying a new generation of shipborne radar sets designed specifically for surface search. Early systems like the SC radar could detect large ships at long range, but they struggled to distinguish small contacts from sea clutter. What changed the equation was the arrival of microwave radar, particularly the SG set. The SG radar operated at much shorter wavelengths, allowing far greater resolution. Periscopes, small hulls, even surfaced submarines with minimal profiles could now be detected at several miles, regardless of darkness or weather. More importantly, the radar's beam was narrow and precise. Operators could track movement, estimate speed, and guide ships toward a target without visual confirmation. For American destroyers, this was transformative. Destroyers had always been submarines' natural enemy, but they had been forced to hunt reactively, waiting for a sighting, a sonar echo, or an attack. Radar reversed that relationship. Now, destroyers could patrol aggressively at night, scanning wide arcs of ocean, detecting surface submarines before the submarines knew they were exposed. This advantage grew sharper as radar became embedded into command systems. American warships introduced combat information centers, CICs, small enclosed spaces where radar operators, plotters, and officers worked together. Information flowed constantly. Bearings were updated. Courses adjusted. Decisions made without hesitation. Radar contact became actionable intelligence within seconds. Japanese submarines, by contrast, operated largely alone. Imperial Japanese Navy doctrine emphasized individual initiative at the tactical level, but it lacked the integrated detection and response networks forming aboard American ships. Japanese submarines carried radar late in the war, but these sets were limited, unreliable, and often inferior in range and resolution. More critically, Japanese commanders underestimated how fully radar had been embraced by U.S. crews. American sailors trained relentlessly. Radar drills became routine. Operators learned to distinguish false echoes from real contacts. Gunnery teams practiced firing using radar bearings alone. Destroyers learned to coordinate radar detection with sonar once contact was lost underwater. Aircraft joined the system, guided toward targets by surface ships using radio and radar vectors. The result was not a single weapon but a kill chain. A Japanese submarine might surface to recharge batteries, standard procedure after sunset. Radar would detect it within minutes. The destroyer would alter course silently. Closing speed would be calculated. Only when within effective gun range would the ship open fire, often using radar-directed guns. For the submarine crew, the experience was disorienting. There was no warning. No aircraft overhead. No visible ships until muzzle flashes lit the night. Even crash diving did not guarantee safety. Sonar would take over. Depth charges followed predictable patterns. Escape required perfect timing, favorable water conditions, and luck. Reports from Japanese submarine commanders began to change tone in 1943. Patrol logs noted encounters where American ships appeared suddenly. Attacks were described as unexplained. Several commanders remarked that destroyers seemed able to sense submarines at night. Some suspected new listening devices. Others believed American lookouts had become exceptionally skilled. Few immediately identified radar as the decisive factor. This misinterpretation delayed adaptation. Japanese tactics still relied on surface maneuvering at night, believing darkness sufficient cover. Submarines continued to operate on assumptions that no longer held true. Meanwhile, American commanders drew clear conclusions. Radar-equipped destroyers were reassigned to aggressive night patrols. Hunter-killer groups formed around escort carriers, extending radar coverage even further. Submarine losses began to rise, not dramatically at first but steadily, relentlessly. By mid-1943, the balance beneath the waves had shifted. Submarines were still dangerous, still capable, but no longer unseen. The night, once the submarine's shield had become an open field. And soon, Japanese commanders would face undeniable proof that the ocean itself had turned against them. For centuries, naval combat had been limited by eyesight. Even with binoculars, the human horizon defined engagement. Darkness erased distance. Fog erased certainty. Radar broke that boundary. By 1943, American destroyers equipped with SG radar could detect surface submarines at ranges between 5 and 10 miles, depending on sea state and target profile. A submarine's low silhouette, once its greatest protection, became a distinct radar return. Even a periscope, if raised long enough, could betray position. This was not merely detection, it was classification. Radar operators learned to recognize patterns. A fast-moving surface contact at night, changing course unpredictably, often indicated a submarine running on the surface. Merchant ships moved steadily. Warships maintained formation. Submarines behaved differently. Once detected, the destroyer no longer needed to close blindly. Radar provided constant updates. Course corrections were made quietly. Speed adjustments were subtle. The submarine, unaware it had been found, continued routine operations. Gunfire, when it came, was sudden and accurate. American 5-inch guns, guided by radar fire control systems, could engage targets without visual alignment. The first salvos often struck close enough to force an emergency dive, sometimes too late. Even if the submarine submerged successfully, it had lost initiative. Technology had removed surprise from one side of the equation. Radar allowed destroyers to stop waiting. Before 1942, anti-submarine warfare was defensive. Escorts reacted to attacks. Convoys zigzagged. Destroyers circled. The goal was deterrence, not destruction. Radar changed intent. With surface search radar, American destroyers began sweeping ahead of convoys at night. They patrolled choke points. They hunted likely submarine routes. Darkness became an advantage for the hunter, not the hunted. Once radar contact was made, the attack sequence was disciplined. The destroyer would close at high speed, maintaining contact until within gun range. If the submarine submerged, sonar took over immediately, guided by the last radar fix. Depth charges were laid in calculated patterns, not guesswork. This integration mattered. Japanese submarine doctrine assumed destroyers lost contact once a submarine submerged. Instead, American crews transitioned smoothly between sensors. Radar handed the target to sonar. Sonar guided the attack. The system did not break. Hunter-killer groups expanded this concept. Escort carriers added airborne radar, extending detection range. Submarines found themselves hunted across multiple layers, surface, air, and underwater. The ocean was no longer empty space. It was structured. Japanese submarine reports from 1943 reveal a growing sense of disorientation. Commanders described being fired upon without warning. Some noted that American destroyers appeared to anticipate their movements. Others reported that even brief surface exposures resulted in immediate attack. The assumption remained that visibility governed detection. Japanese naval intelligence acknowledged Allied improvements but underestimated their scope. Radar was seen as supplementary, not decisive. Few believed destroyers could detect submarines at significant range without visual cues. As a result, operational patterns changed little. Submarines continued night surface transits. Battery recharging followed routine schedules. Radar countermeasures were limited. The belief that the sea itself concealed movement persisted. This gap between reality and perception widened with every patrol. Each unexplained encounter fed uncertainty. Each loss was attributed to chance or enemy vigilance, not a fundamental shift in warfare. But the evidence was accumulating. And soon, even the most experienced commanders would be forced to confront a simple truth. The Americans were seeing them long before they were ever seen. For American sailors, radar demanded a new kind of attentiveness. Eyes alone were no longer sufficient. Operators learned to interpret glowing blips on scopes, distinguishing between ships, waves, and debris. Plotters tracked multiple contacts simultaneously, calculating speed, course, and predicted position. Every night was a classroom. Every patrol a rehearsal. The human factor proved decisive. Crews who could read radar quickly coordinated with gun crews and sonar teams. Decisions were made in seconds. Mistakes were costly. Hesitation meant the submarine could escape, or worse, strike first. But disciplined training turned technology into extension of instinct. For the Japanese submariners, there was no equivalent. They relied on experience and perception. Sound and sight had always dictated survival. The sudden realization that the enemy could see them without being seen shattered familiar rhythms. The psychological strain grew with every patrol. Fatigue combined with uncertainty. Even minor navigational errors became dangerous. Night operations, once routine, now felt like a calculated risk with invisible opponents. The ocean was no longer a neutral environment. It had become a theater where the hunter and hunted were separated by more than steel. They were separated by information. Japanese high command was slow to adapt. Naval doctrine had emphasized aggressive submarine operations, yet it underestimated the pace of Allied technological advancement. Even after multiple losses, operational orders did not account for radar's new reach. American leadership, by contrast, embraced integration. Admiral Ernest King and Vice Admiral Frederick Sherman championed radar-equipped destroyers. Doctrine evolved quickly, linking surface detection to coordinated depth charge attacks. Leadership understood that technology alone was insufficient. It needed disciplined execution and relentless patrol strategies. The contrast in leadership philosophies made a difference. Where Japanese commanders hesitated, American commanders acted. Where Japanese doctrine assumed invisibility, American doctrine exploited transparency. The gap between confidence and capability widened night after night. Radar changed more than tactics. It changed minds. The submarine captain who once navigated the darkness with certainty now faced a haunting awareness. The ocean could betray him at any moment. Night no longer guaranteed safety. Stealth was compromised. Each patrol carried an invisible weight, amplified by the knowledge that the enemy could track movement with an accuracy previously thought impossible. This moral shift rippled throughout the Japanese submarine fleet. Operational aggressiveness diminished. Patience eroded. Every decision carried new psychological costs. The once dominant predator of the night found itself hunted. And in this sense, radar did more than detect. It reshaped strategy, behavior, and the very understanding of naval power. The stage was set for confrontation. Submarines could no longer assume the night was theirs. Every maneuver, every dive, every surfaced moment carried the potential for sudden destruction. It was in these tense hours, under moonless skies and endless waves, that the Pacific truly changed. It was the early hours of June 9, 1943. Off the coast of the Solomon Islands, a Japanese I-class submarine, I-26, patrolled the dark waters. Its crew moved silently, confident in their invisibility. Their periscopes occasionally cut the waves, scanning for American supply convoys. The battery charge was nearly full, the sea calm, the moon hidden behind high clouds. Unbeknownst to them, an American Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Radford, glided through the same waters, radar antenna rotating steadily above its bridge. The Combat Information Center was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the radar set. A small echo appeared, a barely perceptible blip at first, but it was enough. The operators confirmed the contact, adjusted for speed, and the plotting officer predicted the submarine's projected course. The captain of the Radford gave the silent order. The destroyer accelerated, hull slicing through waves. The sonar operator prepared for the inevitable dive. Depth charges were readied. Every man knew the plan, practiced countless times, yet the tension was palpable. This transition set the stage for subsequent campaigns, in which American naval dominance at night would dictate supply, maneuver, and engagement. Submarines were forced to adapt to an entirely new environment, one where invisibility had been rendered obsolete and where every move was potentially observed and countered. By late 1944, the operational landscape for Japanese submarines had been fundamentally altered. In the waters around the Mariana Islands and the Philippines, the U.S. Navy's combination of radar-equipped destroyers, hunter-killer groups, and escort carriers created a near-constant threat. Japanese supply runs, reconnaissance missions, and even opportunistic attacks became increasingly perilous. Submarines that had once moved with confidence now traveled under extreme caution, often submerged for long durations to avoid detection. This imposed severe limitations on range, speed, and endurance. Losses continued to accumulate. The Imperial Japanese Navy's own records indicate that between 1943 and 1945, more than 100 submarines were sunk by destroyers or coordinated air-surface attacks, a dramatic increase compared to early war figures. Key patrols intended to reinforce Japanese positions in the Central Pacific were delayed, rerouted, or abandoned entirely. Strategic goals became harder, if not impossible, to achieve. The psychological effect on commanders was as profound as the tactical impact. Radar also influenced broader operational doctrine. The Japanese realized too late that conventional assumptions about night concealment and submarine invulnerability were obsolete. Attempts to counter radar with passive measures, camouflage, radio silence, or night discipline, offered limited relief. The Americans, by contrast, refined the integration of radar, sonar, and tactical coordination into a seamless system. Engagements no longer depended on chance. Detection became predictable and destruction followed. The tactical and strategic imbalance reinforced U.S. control over critical sea lanes. Convoys moved with relative security, allowing the steady buildup of troops, fuel, and material necessary for major operations such as the Mariana Islands Campaign, Leyte Gulf, and Iwo Jima. Japanese submarines could not prevent the flow of resources that would sustain the American advance across the Pacific. By 1945, radar-equipped destroyers had become symbols of American naval supremacy. Their presence alone constrained Japanese submarine operations. Commanders acknowledged in reports that the ocean itself had become hostile, and that traditional submarine tactics were no longer sufficient. The shift extended beyond the Pacific. The lessons learned influenced Allied anti-submarine efforts in the Atlantic, accelerating technological development and refining engagement doctrine against U-boats. Ultimately, radar did more than detect targets. It reshaped naval psychology, strategy, and the balance of power at sea. Submarines were no longer masters of stealth. They were constantly measured against a new, invisible, and unforgiving system of observation. The hunter had become the hunted, and in doing so, the Pacific Ocean had fundamentally changed the nature of naval warfare. The story of radar in the Pacific is not just a tale of technology. It is a story of adaptation, perception, and the relentless evolution of warfare. Japanese submarines had once ruled the night. Their patrols were defined by stealth, patience, and the belief that darkness provided invulnerability. American destroyers, relying on eyesight, sonar, and sheer persistence, could rarely contest them after dusk. That balance shifted not through a single battle, but through a quiet revolution of sight. Radar transformed the ocean into a visible space. It rendered assumptions obsolete. It forced both sides to reconsider the meaning of risk, safety, and strategy. For Japanese commanders, the sea became a domain of uncertainty, where each movement might betray them to unseen observers. For American crews, the same technology became a force multiplier, a silent partner that extended human perception far beyond natural limits. Beyond the tactical and strategic implications, radar changed how men experienced war. The terror of being hunted without seeing the hunter, the pressure of operating under constant observation, and the exhilaration of mastering a new battlefield sensor, all shaped morale, decision-making, and survival. Technology and human will intertwined in ways that would define naval warfare for decades to come. This episode illustrates a timeless lesson. Dominance is rarely about brute strength alone. It is about perception, anticipation, and integration, seeing before being seen, acting before being forced to react. The Pacific Ocean, once a place where darkness offered sanctuary, became a proving ground for innovation and discipline. Every engagement, every patrol, and every loss carried the imprint of a new kind of power, one that combined human skill with machine precision. In the end, radar did not just kill submarines. It changed the way men understood the ocean, the night, and the possibilities of modern warfare. It demonstrated that technological insight, combined with training and coordination, could tip the scales decisively. And it marked the moment when invisibility ceased to be a shield and became, instead, a vulnerability.